Hey guys, Scott here. Now that 2025 is officially behind us, we can finally do something most people don't do properly. We can actually look back at what really happened in the property market without speculation, without any emotion, and without headlines getting in the way. And honestly, this year exposed a lot of bad property advice. It exposed a lot of so-called experts. It exposed a lot of media narratives that really can lead you astray. And unfortunately, it cost a lot of Aussies serious money, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars, simply because they believed the wrong things at the wrong time, had the wrong data, had the wrong information. All through 2025, there were 4 very strong ideas being pushed online. They sounded logical, they sounded comforting, and they sounded like the safe approach. But now that the year is done and the data is in, we know those ideas were totally wrong. If you've been watching this channel, you'll know I kept warning people about these mistakes all year. Some listened, a lot didn't. So in this video, I want to walk you through the 4 biggest property mistakes people made in 2025, why they turned out to be so expensive, and most importantly, why you absolutely cannot afford to repeat them in 2026. Stick with me, because this isn't theory anymore. This is hindsight backed by real outcomes. So let's take a look at mistake number 1. Believing the government had the answers. So the first big mistake was believing that the government had housing under control, or that a fix was just around the corner. A lot of people went into 2025 thinking, surely now the government will step in, ramp up supply, and actually stabilize the property market. But if you actually followed what happened behind the scenes, that belief fell apart very quickly. We had a Senate inquiry led by Andrew Bragg that directly questioned the government on housing. And when you watched it, what stood out wasn't just the lack of solutions, it was the lack of clarity. They couldn't clearly explain what the 1.2 million homes by 2029 promise actually meant in practical terms. They couldn't say how many homes had really been delivered, how far behind they were, or how they were realistically going to catch up. The HAFF, the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, was another example. It was sold as a major solution, yet after audits and reviews, it became clear it wasn't delivering anywhere near what was promised. The numbers simply didn't stack up, and the National Housing Accord missed its first-year targets by a wide margin. So if you spent 2025 waiting for government policy to stabilize and the market to stabilize, what you learned the hard way is this: the housing crisis is now far bigger than any government's ability to fix it quickly. There is no quick fix here. The government doesn't control the construction workforce. They don't control build costs. They don't control how long approvals take. And most importantly, they don't have a short-term lever that suddenly floods the market with new supply. Relying on the government to fix housing in time for you to benefit was a very expensive assumption. Now, the second mistake was waiting for the crash that actually never came. All through 2025, there was no shortage of content saying Australia had to follow New Zealand or Canada. People kept pointing to overseas markets and arguing that because those markets had slowed or corrected, Australia had to be next. Now, it sounded logical on the surface: similar economies, similar interest rate cycles, similar housing pressures. But what actually happened showed why that thinking was absolutely flawed. Australia's housing market is structurally different. Our banking system, our lending standards, our tax incentives, our population growth, and our chronic supply shortages create a very different dynamic. While other countries corrected, Australia kept moving. Prices did not collapse, demand didn't disappear, and momentum carried through the entire year. The people who waited for a crash in 2025 didn't just miss an entry point, they missed equity growth, they missed rental tightening, and they also missed the base from which the next leg of growth is now building upon. So a warning here: if you're still waiting for a crash in 2026, you're not being cautious, you're actually anchoring to a story that the data no longer supports. So the third big mistake was believing that the government schemes would make housing more affordable. Now, throughout 2025, we saw the rollout of the 5% deposit scheme, the shared equity programs, higher price caps, broader eligibility, and understandably, a lot of people thought this was finally meaningful help from the government. But the problem was never demand. The problem was supply. These schemes didn't build a single extra home. They didn't speed up approvals. They didn't fix labor shortages. They didn't reduce construction costs. What they did do was bring more buyers into an already constrained market. So instead of making homes more affordable, they actually did the opposite. They actually drove property price increases. Ultimately, they increased competition. And when competition increases in a market with limited stock, prices rise. The first group through the door benefited, everyone else paid more. That's why these schemes are self-defeating. They look good politically, but economically, they push prices further out of reach. If you're hoping another policy announcement in 2026 will suddenly make housing more affordable, you're likely to be disappointed again. Now, the final mistake was believing that waiting would eventually tilt the market in your favor. So many people spent 2025 saying they'd wait for rates to drop further, wait for competition to ease, or wait for prices to settle down. But while they waited, the market kept adjusting around them. Tax cuts came through, demand stayed strong, listings remained extremely tight, prices kept moving. Waiting didn't preserve capital, it actually eroded your opportunities and your gains. And the same risk exists in the market right now. Interest rates matter, but they are only one piece of the puzzle. Supply shortages, population growth, construction delays, and policy design are far more powerful forces in today's market, and none of those pressures are easing meaningfully into 2026. So if there's one thing 2025 taught us, it's this. The government doesn't have a quick fix. The market isn't about to crash. Demand-side schemes don't solve affordability, and waiting is not a strategy. If you made these mistakes last year, the good news is you can still learn from them. You don't need perfect timing, you don't need perfect conditions, you just need to understand the direction the market is moving and act accordingly. This is very important because every year you wait, the gap between you and the market will get wider. As always, this is your daily property update, your 5 to 7 minute breakdown of what's really happening in the Australian property market so that you can become a property insider. And if you found this useful, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video.